Congress is on a holiday break back in their home districts this week, so I thought for just a moment, let's talk about something other than tariffs, something that impacts us all and our families. It's a new Smarter series on education. I'm Jenna, and this is Smarter News. First, a little background. The idea for this segment comes from my past experience working in traditional news. When I worked for a cable news network as a national news anchor, we would have debates. Two people with vastly different opinions on a big topic debating on live television. And we would have these debates all packaged in about 3 to 4 minutes. And it was really impossible to create something that felt meaningful and productive. I remember asking one of my producers, what is the point of this? What do we want our audience to walk away with? And it was always, this is good TV. The emotion, the anger, the red meat. The red meat was a term that was used by producers to talk about a controversial topic. Think about lions in a zoo tearing apart red meat. This is what they thought these segments produced, and this is what they thought you wanted. I disagreed with that. I didn't love these segments. In fact, at certain points, I stopped doing them. And you'll still see them. You'll still see them on live television now. But the media has also evolved, and we have an alternative. We have these 1 to 3 hour podcasts, and that's better. But I don't always have the time to listen to a 1 to 3 hour podcast on a topic and then cross compare it to other podcasts that have a different opinion. So I thought, what if we did a series where you get to hear from a really interesting person for like 20-ish minutes on a topic, and then the next day, the opposite perspective on the same topic, and then you can just think about it and make up your own mind. And that's what we did here. We have 2 great guests on the topic of education in America. One is Arne Duncan. He's a former Secretary of Education under President Obama. He actually was a professional basketball player for several years before working in one of the nation's largest school districts, Chicago. He believes we really need the Department of Education. The other guest is Erica Donalds. She started her career in finance. She was a big-time executive before her personal experience in local schools led her to education. She does not think we need the Department of Education. Both of these individuals believe in education. They have a real passion behind this topic. They're also both parents, so this is personal for them. What I want you to watch for is the fact that they actually use some of the same language to describe the problem as they see it when they look at education in America. It's just their approach on how to solve that problem is simply different. I really loved our conversations. I learned a lot. I hope they provide something for you to consider, however you already feel about this topic. So first up, here's the former Secretary of Education for the United States of America, Arne Duncan. Well, Secretary Duncan, I know you told me to call you Arne. It's going to be hard for me to do that because when we met, you were a member of the cabinet, and I want to be respectful of that. I was doing some research in preparation for our conversation. I stumbled upon a fact that I just want to double check with you because I'm really into double and triple sourcing. I learned that your nickname playing professional basketball in Australia was Cobra. Is that accurate? Can you confirm or deny that?
You must have gone deep doing research. Now I'm really scared about this interview, but I can confirm that is accurate.
Well, the reason why I bring that up is that part of your personal story is that you played professional basketball in Australia. And I did see also as part of your bio that when you were there, you actually spent some time tutoring children that were wards of the state. What was that like?
Yeah, so I spent 4 years there that were life, transforming for me, and I desperately wanted to play professionally here. I tried out for the Boston Celtics, and I was so good they sent me to the other side of the earth to play. So I did not make the Boston Celtics, but it was my dream to play professionally, and got so lucky to be able to do it, and met my wife there. But I love love hoops, still love hoops. Played this morning, and that's my stress relief these days. But my real passion has always been education and kids. So I did a couple things, and when you're playing professionally there, it's a fantastic life. They give you a house, they give you a car, they pay you, but you have some time. And so I did 2 things. I worked with kids who were wards of the state, and that was really important for me, and just different culture, obviously different context, but lots of similar issues to kids I grew up with here in Chicago. And I actually coached a team of urban Aborigines, and that was fascinating to me to, just try and understand, that experience and what that community had been through. So it definitely, literally was a different world, a new world, and it really stretched me. And I'd like to think hopefully made me smarter coming back here.
How did you go from that to then becoming the chief executive officer, superintendent of Chicago schools?
Yeah, there are a couple steps in between that. So, yeah, just be very, sort of personal and honest. I've had a best friend and mentor since I was 10 years old, a guy named John Rogers, who runs Ariel Capital Management, Ariel Investments. He was the star of the high school basketball team when I was a little guy. He was my Michael Jordan. I followed him around like a puppy dog. And he started his company as an entrepreneur, Ariel, when he was like 24. It's sort of a crazy story. And he was starting to be successful, and rather than buying a house or a boat or a fancy car or something, he wanted to set up a nonprofit foundation to work in the community. And he knew of my family's, what my mother had done, and my rest of our family had done in the community. And so he asked me to come back and run that for him. And it's actually crazy because it's such a great life over there. Many Americans just stay. It's a very seductive lifestyle. And I wanted to come back home and help out because Chicago had, given me every opportunity athletically, educationally, socially, culturally. But I guess what's called today social capital. I didn't really have any social capital, so not much. And it's crazy. Like, had he not given me that opportunity, honestly, I would still be living in Australia. It's just this sort of fork in the road in my life. And he gave me the opportunity to come home. And I set up his foundation with my sister Sarah. And what we did is we ran an I Have a Dream program. So we took 46 graders from the local elementary school where my mother had always worked in the community, and we promised to pay for their college education if they made it through high school. And we tutored them every day and worked with their families. I was just the guy who drove the white van around and picked kids up after school and took them home after tutoring. During those 6 years, the neighborhood public school closed. So we started our own public school, Ariel Community Academy, which recently turned 25 years old, which is sort of crazy. And then when our dreamers graduated from high school going to college, we really thought about what right next thing to do was. And we thought about doing another I Have a Dream program, which would have been 40 kids. We thought about starting another school, which would have been 400, but there were 400,000 in the Chicago public schools. And just the math of it, the 40 to 400 to 400,000, I thought about, like, if you really want to have impact, you have to go inside the public school system. And very honestly, the public school system had always been the enemy for our family. The neighborhood schools where my mother worked were horrific. The local high school had a 67% dropout rate. And so she was always trying to do from 3 o'clock to 8 o'clock at night what wasn't happening during the school day for kids. And my sister and I were trying to do the same thing. But it really was, I just had to reflect and say it's sort of easy to critique from the outside. It's easy to throw stones. It's a very different thing to try and roll up your sleeves and go in there and see if you could make a difference. So that was how I ended up in the Chicago Public Schools. I was a nobody there, worked for a couple, 2.5 years, and the previous CEO, Paul Vallis, ran for governor, and the mayor picked me as a 36-year-old. He probably regretted a lot of days to take over the CPS.
Wow, that's extremely helpful. First of all, we have something in common. My mother was a public school teacher in really tough neighborhoods, and it was her way of giving back to the community that helped serve her. She's the first person in her family to graduate from college. But this is really important pieces because we have a 6'5" basketball. That's what Google said, Arne. 6'5" basketball player named Cobra. Nicknamed Cobra, coming back to Chicago and seeing education from a lot of different points of view. He's the guy that drives the van that then becomes the CEO of Chicago School District, that then becomes Secretary of Education. So you've been able to see education from a lot of different points of view, which really brings us to today, because despite a lot of the disagreement about the Department of Education, which is what we're going to talk about, there seems to be bipartisan agreement that we could do better as a country when it comes to educating our kids. And so just broadly speaking, what do you think is key to that?
Yeah, so first of all, I would say education should be the ultimate bipartisan and nonpartisan issue. There's nothing left to write about giving our kids a chance in life, and better pre-K and more kids reading at third grade and raising graduation rates. And it kills me. It's just so incredibly sad to me how politicized and divisive it has become. And we just hurt kids. Kids are pawns in this political game today. It's so incredibly discouraging to me. So a couple things. We had tens of millions of kids who were too far behind before the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, those kids fell even further behind. So I'm desperately worried about a lost generation. You probably saw the recent NAEP scores that showed where we are relative to other countries, and it's nowhere near where we want to be or should be. So there are two very concrete things to help kids catch up. One is high dosage tutoring, and where you have high dosage tutoring, kids accelerate their learning very, very quickly. And then secondly, just your career, any one of your listeners' careers, my career, if you want to do well, you just have to work a little bit harder. And kids just need more time. So whether it's more time after school, whether it's more time on Saturdays, whether it's less summer break, frankly, and more school, kids just need to work hard to catch up. And we should all be all in to help kids catch up as fast as they can and have a chance in life. And the fact that that's being lost in the political shenanigans is, again, incredibly discouraging.
Why do you think the Department of Education is key to making those things happen? Why do we need it?
Well, that's the right question. So there are three things I think the Department of Education must do and should do. And I did it very imperfectly every day. I did it to the best of my ability, but never ever close to perfectly. So there are three things. One is fighting for equity. So for me, that's more kids having access to pre-K. That's school lunches for kids that are hungry. That's Title I money for kids who live below the poverty line. That's IDA funding for kids who have special needs, 7.5 million across the country. It's more money for rural students. It's Pell Grants for many first generation college goers having a chance to be the first generation in their family. You talked about your mom. Same thing. So that fight for equity is critically important and needs leadership at the federal level. Secondly, for me, is we have to fight for excellence, and we need a high bar. In too many states historically, it had a very low bar and dummied down standards to make kids look good. And when I came there, we challenged folks to raise standards. I always remember Tennessee, happened to be a Republican governor, loved him. Governor Haslam did incredible work. My numbers won't be exact, but when they raised standards as a state, they went from saying like 85% of kids are reading at grade level to like 25%. And that's a very tough thing to tell to parents and tell to moms, but it was the truth. And they were finally willing to tell the truth because we were challenging folks to be more honest there. And so having a high bar, trying to raise high school graduation rates, trying to lead the world in college completion, that fight for excellence. And the third thing that people don't think enough about is scaling. It's innovation. It's scaling what works. And one of the joys of my job is I got to travel to all 50 states, visited hundreds and hundreds of schools, many amazing, some that would break your heart. But I always say that for every education challenge we have in our country, it is being solved somewhere. I saw it. I know it is. What we don't do in education is we don't scale. We don't take to scale what works. And the U.S. Department of Education is uniquely positioned to scale what's working. We had a fund called the I3 Invest Innovation Fund where we took money not based upon my ideas or President Obama's ideas, just show us evidence of what you're doing. Show us how you're raising high school graduation rates in Appalachia, and we'll give you more money to do that. And so that's the kind of thing that the U.S. Department of Education can do. So those three things, fighting for equity, having a high bar excellence, and then scaling innovation, that's what I think is critically important. And unfortunately, we're losing all of that as we speak.
So that's really interesting to map it out in those kind of three different buckets. Let's talk a little bit about maybe pulling from the scale part and also just talking about local empowerment. I mean, that it's interesting as a journalist to take the same fact and use it in different ways and for different people, because for those that are against the Department of Education, one of the questions I ask is, well, it's only 10% of education funding. Like, why be so against it? But the same question I could ask to you. It sounds like it's significant funding, but it's not that much. What's the big deal about moving out that funding from the Department of Education and putting it in other departments to help administer as the Trump administration is painting that picture?
Yeah, it's a very fair question. So a couple things. First of all, is you have bureaucratic chaos. And what we tried to do with the department was have what we call a state desk. That if you had any question from a state, you would call one phone number and we could direct you whatever your question was internal to get your answer. And now can you imagine if you're a state or district trying to navigate 6 or 8 or 10 different bureaucracies in DC and get answers to your question? That's crazy. The second thing is that just candidly, many states just aren't good actors. And for me, it's so important. This money, this is not Trump's money. It's your listeners, it's your money, it's my money, it's your listeners, your viewers' money. It's our tax dollars. And I want us to invest in poor kids. I want us to give more resources for special needs kids. I want rural students to have, more access. I want more kids to have access to free lunch if they're hungry. I want kids to have access to Pell Grants. But what I also want with that is accountability. And let me just give you a very quick example. I was in Mississippi last week. In Mississippi, where they just, this block grant, just give the money. The previous governor took $77 million of TANF money for the poorest people in Mississippi. They basically stole that money to build athletic stadiums for Brett Favre's daughter and for others. I mean, it's just like this insane, literally just stealing tax money because it was just block granted. And so for me, just to block grant money out to states and not have any accountability, you're going to see some nefarious things happen that don't help a child with special needs. 7.5 million across the country. And so that's my huge concern, is that when you do this, bad actors are going to take money from our most vulnerable kids and fund their pet projects, and that scares the living daylights out of me.
That's so interesting, because accountability is also an argument I've heard from conservatives about making sure the money is spent the right way. And their argument is, well, we have to put it in locales because then taxpayers can see exactly what's happening and hold local leaders accountable, rather than the Department of Education, which can kind of seem far away and distant and you don't know who to call. Is there an argument as well for putting those funds locally so people can actually see what's happening? Is that better for taxpayers?
Well, to be clear, the money, 100% of it goes to those local communities. It goes to states and districts. So that's what happens. So that's not news. I'm just always very honest, I wish there are more Republicans asking for education accountability. I don't hear that honestly anywhere. Jeb Bush used to be fantastic in Florida and did some great work there. And I talked about Governor Haslam and Governor Kasich, but very candidly, I don't hear any Republicans talking about education goals for students, what our goal is for high school graduation rates, what our goal is for third grade reading scores. All I hear them honestly talking about is fear. And so anyone who wants to have an accountability conversation, I would partner with them, I would work with them, I would encourage that, because our kids don't just need money, our kids need to improve academically. And money can be a tool, a strategy to get there. But if kids aren't learning, we're crippling them for the rest of their lives. And so that's the name of the game. And I mean, just very candidly, that has been lost from the Republican Party.
No, listen, you speak from a position of experience, having visited these states, and your point of view is really valuable to us. Again, seeing education from a lot of different perspectives. I would like to ask you about something specifically that conservatives have pointed to during the Obama administration. And it comes to that other point that you were talking about, which is equity, something that the Department of Education is one of the main foundational pieces, which is to help enforce civil rights for students, whether it's race, gender, religion. And so there was a letter, and I'm curious about this. So this, and it's interesting, Arne, over the course of the last, I don't know, decade, I feel like once you get over a decade, you start sounding old. So I'll say over the last decade, this particular piece has come up repeatedly, is pointed to as a sign that the Department of Education can be guilty of federal overreach. And when you talk about fear from conservatives, some of the fear is that there's federal overreach. So this was a letter that was sent out in 2014. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's a Dear Colleague letter on the non-discriminatory administration of school discipline. And in this letter, I just actually reread it, and I'll put that link for our audience so they can read it too. You talk about racial discrimination in school discipline being a real problem in America, and you map out a plan, which is that you're going to provide guidance to schools, and that's going to be helpful to them to lessen the potential for discrimination that's happening based on discipline. Your critics, including the Manhattan Institute, which is a conservative think tank, have used this to say, look, this is an example of the federal government saying they're going to withhold funds if discipline isn't done in a certain way. And this has forced school districts to change discipline in a way that wasn't good for their local communities. Talk to us through this a little bit. What about this letter? Is this an example of federal overreach and putting something in place that could be a wrong incentive?
That's one interpretation, but I always try and go back to first principles and values. And let me tell you where that came from. Our Office of Civil Rights did a civil rights data collection project every year and captured all kinds of data. You sort of think you've seen it all and know everything. And one year what came back was that across the country, we were suspending lots and lots of 3- and 4-year-olds from pre-K. That stunned me. It was like mind-boggling to me. I had no clue. I remember it's like a punch in the gut, and they showed me the data. It takes a minute to sort of, is this actually real? And then when you dig into the data, you see, guess who's being suspended very disproportionately was Black boys and students of color. And we talk about the school to prison pipeline, and that's real, unfortunately, in some places. But I had no idea it started by 3 and 4 year olds. It's just absolutely heartbreaking.
What
And
were they
so
being suspended for, by the way? I mean, that's
that
shocking. I think anyone who's hearing that.
shocking is the understatement of the year on it. And I can't tell you case by case, but I just can't imagine what a 3 year old would do. And let's be clear, 3 year olds have challenges, they have struggles, but those are the kids that need school the most. Those are the kids that need socialization the most. Those are the kids you got to wrap your arms around. And the fact that we were suspending and expelling them in, I don't remember the stats, I don't want to misquote, but
Sure.
wildly disproportionately Black boys, that's the kind of thing that we're challenging. And so to say that, states can get this right by themselves, they weren't. It's just that they weren't. And if we don't care about it, if we think that's okay, that we're kicking out 3 and 4 year old Black boys out of pre-K, if people think that's okay, I hear that. I don't understand that, and frankly, I don't respect that. And there's nothing the 3 or 4 year old could do to make me kick them out of school and not, if they need more social work help, bring the parents in. Let's work. Again, there are very real challenges there, but the answer to those challenges, in my mind, is never you can't come to school anymore. And so that's very specifically the kind of mentality that we were challenging. And I'll give you one more just to be from my experience in Chicago. So very telling a story on myself that I'm not proud of. We had there were too many CPS students being arrested. And I went early on in my tenure with CPS. I went to the head of the police and said, "We got good kids, stop arresting them," And he said, "Let me look at the data." And then he came back to me a couple of weeks later. And the police shifts go from 12 at night to 8 in the morning, 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, and 4 in the afternoon till 12 at night, 3 shifts. And guess when the vast majority of kids are being arrested? They're being arrested during the school day from 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. And why were they being arrested? Because my principals, our CPS principals, were calling the police on our kids. Some schools as much as every other day. And so
did they need to? I mean, I'm just asking because I wasn't in the Chicago school district.
So
were they violent? Is there some reason to call the police?
In some cases, there's absolutely a reason. But what we had some schools where they're calling the police 100 times a year on a 180-year school day in a school 3 blocks down the street, same socioeconomic challenge, and they never called the police. So we did we met the enemy and it was us. And so we did a massive amount of retraining of principals and helped them. We reduced those numbers very dramatically. And so I just want to be very clear on this, that, school systems have, states do things, unless you're really being transparent, looking at the data, you could do things that are doing tremendous damage to kids. And so I just didn't see it across the country. I saw it in my own backyard under my watch.
That is very fascinating. And what you bring up is the bigger debate that's always there. I mean, consistently in America as old as time, is how big is the federal government? How big should it be? And how big and important is state leadership, and the tension between the two, and what does the right balance look like? So I'm glad we talked a little bit about that, and we could probably talk an hour on that because there's a lot of research done around it, and I, of course, have a million questions. But for now, we'll leave it there because I know we're short on time. You're a dad. How old are your kids now? You got 2 kids?
23 and 21. 23 and 21. So
wow.
They grow up too fast. I miss their little stuff. I miss those days every day.
Yeah, my little girls, I have 3 kids. One of them's turning 9 this weekend. And I finally realized, this is what everyone's talking about when they say it goes real fast. You definitely start feeling it. From what you see, just as a father, and also is playing all these different roles in education, given the reality of the Department of Education likely winding down, and we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. There's a lot of unknown. What I'm curious to ask you about as a final question is that you've worked to support education in a lot of different forms. So you've been inside the schools, you've been outside the schools. Is there a way to think about a new way of public-private partnership that will help support schools, maybe that we're not considering in, I don't want to say the traditional way of federal and state government, since you really have seen it at a local level? Can communities help solve the education problem themselves? How can they do that?
100%. And for me, you always need public-private partnerships. And there's a critical role for the public sector, but they can't do it alone. There's a critical role for not just philanthropy and corporate giving, but volunteers. And so just a couple of very concrete things. First of all, having real knowledge and honesty about how students are performing. And in many school districts, not all, parents generally think 80 to 90% of kids are performing at grade level, and usually it's about a third. So there's a massive gap between what parents think and what the truth is. And that's not a perception gap, that's a reality gap. And for me, that's absolutely scary. And so parents should know their child's strengths and weaknesses, and all of our kids have strengths, all our kids have weaknesses. You got to be very honest. And for me, where parents and teachers and kids work together, when you have that triangle working together and the community can help as well, then great things can happen for kids. When everyone's an island, when parents don't talk to school doesn't talk to parents, where the community isn't engaged, then kids fall through the cracks. And for me, this is community building. This is building strong families. This is nation building work that we should all be in together. And so, yes, if community members want to, partner and help tutor or help coach or help mentor, academic decathlon, a yearbook, or, debate, whatever it might be, whatever your passion is, if you can help take that to kids, they'll see your passion, and some will gravitate that way. So we all have to be in this together. And again, it breaks my heart what I'm seeing, out of the current administration, quite frankly, because, for me, the crisis facing the country is we have a reading crisis, and we got to help kids better learn how to read. And there's not one thing, not a single thing Trump has talked about that helps a child learn how to read. And when you poll parents are worried about four things. They're worried about academic achievement. They're worried about their children's mental health. They're worried about bullying in schools. And they're worried about mass shootings, school shootings. And again, nothing that you've heard from the current administration, zero, addresses any of what real parents are concerned about. And that's what's so discouraging and scary, frankly, about what I'm seeing coming out of DC today.
It's interesting to think about those 4 points that leave our audience to reflect on that, but certainly hits close to home. We're approaching this story, Secretary Duncan, and that's why it's great to have you as an opportunity for creative disruption. And that's why we're talking to a lot of different people, like, what can we actually do? What's the possibility to create at this time that maybe does change the course of American history for the better? So we're going to remain optimistic, but that's what we do at Smarter News. Believe me, we vacillate between optimistic and pessimistic on a regular basis. That's what happens when you work in journalism. It's probably similar a little bit with education, but I appreciate your time, and thanks so much for taking a few moments to speak to us and share some of your story.
Thanks for the opportunity. Have a great day.